Hey everyone, Ashley Mailloux here with the Daily Racing Form. This Saturday, March 4th, there are a ton of stakes races at Gulfstream Park, and we're going to do a stakes preview for the Grade 3 Canadian Turf at a mile and a 16th on the grass. Race number 8 from Gulfstream Park. We'll take a look at this field. It's a really nice big field that's been assembled of 10 runners and some nice names in here. The number 3 Emmanuel, the morning line favorite, who was talked about a lot last year on the road to the Derby and the Triple Crown, and unfortunately, he did not make starts in those races, and has more recently tried the turf out and has handled it quite nicely. The one English B, I have some interest in him out of the Graham Motion Barn, and even some other names in here. Safe Conduct might ring a bell. This was the horse that won the Queen's Plate back in 2021. Dakota Gold. We all know about the Breeders' Cup and that runner. So it's a really nice field, and we'll dive into it. Lots of replays to look at, a lot of things to examine. I mentioned the number one English B, a horse that I have a bit of interest in. This one's out of the Graham Motion Barn. He's 7 years old, a 7-time winner from 28 starts in his career. And the big thing that I really like is last time out, we'll show that replay. We hadn't seen him prior to this start at Gulfstream Park since he raced at Pimlico back in May of 2022. You see he's the number 5 in here. He's on the inside in those famous Calumet Silks, and he is game throughout in this race. He was forwardly placed in this race, and to see him kind of kick on here, he has some pressure. You can see the 6 is next to him as well as the 2, and he's able to win this race, and I was impressed with it for 2 reasons. Not only was his first start in a while and his first win in a while, but more importantly, he was gelded prior to that start, and that's something that the connections talked a lot about and made that decision. I'm wondering if that's kind of what helped him, and really excited to see him progress from there. Luis Saez has been aboard for his last several starts and sticks with him, and have to love the work that Luis Saez has been doing down at Gulfstream Park, especially this meet. We'll move to the number 2, California Frolic. This is one that was in a nice handicap race, an overnight handicap race last time out, but that was on the Tapeta. 2 starts back, he was a game second, a late closing kick there in the Grade 3 Virginia Derby. My concern with him is I actually think his Tapeta races are a bit stronger. He's in deeper waters. 21 on the morning line for trainer Armando de la Cerda. Now, the number 3 Emmanuel I mentioned, morning line favorite. A lot of hype on this horse last year and even this year since he's moved over the turf. And we'll take a look at his most recent score. And by far his best Beyer speed figure. He recorded a 98 in that turf race, the Grade 3 Tampa Bay at Tampa Bay Downs. And when you look at him in this race, in terms of position, he's the number 6. He gets to the outside, and he's got this nice late closing kick. He's going to end up getting the job done in here. A lot of horses in here are trying to make up ground, but when he hit his best stride, I think it was, in that final less than a 16th to the wire, and excited to kind of see him from a mile and a 16th staying at that distance. In terms of pace, I think he's going to get a good setup. He can be forwardly placed, but in his last 2, we've seen him kind of sit just off the pace, and I like that, especially on this turf course. I don't think you want to be too far behind, but don't necessarily need the lead as well. So Emmanuel, short price though, 8-5. The number 4, Fort Washington, ran a really nice third last time out in a race that was moved from the turf to the Tapeta, and we'll show this race. It's a key race for a couple of reasons. 3 contenders in this field exit that race. When you look at the horses here, we'll circle them in a minute. I want to focus on 3 different runners. The number 7 towards the back, the number 4, and the 8. The 7 is actually Fort Washington. The 4 is Dakota Gold, and the 8 is Steady On. And Steady On was kind of close to the pace in here, Dakota Gold as well. But to see the late kick that Fort Washington had here with these Tapeta races at Gulfstream Park, it's not uncommon to see these blanket finishes. It was a really tight finish, a great performance from this one at 11-1. And prior to that, you can kind of look at his starts, both at a mile in Kentucky, at Kentucky Downs and Keeneland. He's coming from off the pace. That is his run style. That's not going to change. My concern is it doesn't seem necessarily that he likes to get the job done. So maybe if you're playing the exotics, a horse to consider underneath, but really going to need to step forward to be competitive with other runners in the field. The number 5, Good Governance, has been in the barn of Anna Mia for those last 2 starts. Was 4th in the Grade 2 Fort Lauderdale in the first start for the barn, but more recently tackled the Grade 1 Pegasus World Cup Turf Invitational. And I wanted to show this replay because when you look at the run line, you wonder if this horse was, kind of close to it and fades. And I found it a very peculiar stretch run where you look here, number 2 is Good Governance, was making some, run and really moving up nicely, and then kind of flattens here and then runs into traffic. And to me, the jock wasn't in a position to ask this horse to really move forward because there was nowhere to go. But when I see that run line, I wonder if this horse, if you just look at it, wow, that's disappointing. But I actually think this horse ran sneaky well in the Pegasus World Cup Turf Invitational. We know the waters were deep. Ivar, Atone were the top 2 in there. So Good Governance, an intriguing horse in here, and now just making the 3rd start for the connections. The number 6, Shadow Sphinx, out of the Mike Maker barn. was a winner last time out in a race carded for the turf. It was rained off. In terms of position, I think he's going to be kind of mid-pack early on and will make that late run. And he's a consistent type. My concern with him is when you look, he hasn't been at this level too often. He tackled grade 2 competition 2 starts back, and it didn't show anything. They did go a little bit quick early on, going a mile and an eighth, and he was mid-pack, but didn't have a late run. It was nice to see him, though, land on the winner's circle last time out. The number 7, this is an intriguing horse out of the Marty Drexler barn. Super Dormy was a winner in his last 2 starts, one of which was sprinting on the Tapeta at Woodbine. And more recently, after having a couple months off in that first start at Gulfstream Park, it was a nice winner. It was a field of 10 in that allowance optional claiming event. Split that field early on and made a nice late run under Javier Castellano. Does get a new pilot of Edgar Zayas in the spot. You look down the page, a very consistent runner. And the big thing with him would be the distance. I mean, he does have one try going long, and he handled the mile really nicely last time out at Gulfstream Park, which is a 2-turn race. And I'm just curious. He's been in a lot of sprints, and I think he's a horse that as they get older, maybe he's going to appreciate the longer distance. So I loved his performance last time out. The number 8, Safe Conduct, I mentioned, won the plate not too many years ago. Now a 5-year-old son of Bodemeister, who figures to be part of the pace scenario. We see it time and time again. He's typically quite close to the pace. More recently was 3rd. A grade 3 Knickerbocker. My concern with him is when you go down the page and you look at his most recent win, it was against lesser competition. It was at Monmouth. And I'm concerned that he doesn't have that late punch that he's going to need here. There are going to be horses that are going to be close to him throughout this race, and I think have a better closing kick. And I'm not sure about his chances. Emma Jane Wilson has been aboard him before and is back aboard in this race. The number 9, Dakota Gold. We showed that replay of the Tropical Park Derby. This one was, closer than other horses. It's definitely closer than Fort Washington was in that spot. He could be potentially a part of the pace scenario. I do see him maybe sitting 2nd or 3rd when you start to dive into this race more often. You look at him, obviously, he ended up going off favored in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. Finished 5th in there, and since then he does have 2 wins. But they were against fellow New York breds. He's fared okay in his races. I just am not sure he's necessarily at this level, and I think he's a notch below several of the other runners in here. And then wrapping up the field in here, the number 10, Steady On. This one is one trained by Todd Pletcher, who was 4th. We showed that replay, was very close in that race. And looking at his races, he figures to be part of the pace scenario, or at least close to it as well. I misspoke. We actually showed his race 2 starts back where he's still close to it and finished 2nd, beaten by a nose in the Tropical Park. He's actually had another start since then where he finished 4th. He didn't take a ton of respect in that race. Now, it was on the Tapeta. So the big thing for him is I'm curious to see him back on the turf. It's been a little bit, and I do think that could be his preferred surface. And Irad Ortiz Jr. has the call, and we just know how well he's been riding all meet long, multiple win days left and right. So I think he's a horse that's going to take respect on the top board. So an interesting field of 10 in the Canadian turf. I think when you look at most recent performances, the number 3, Emmanuel, was really impressive at Tampa Bay Downs, but I'm going to go in a different direction. Hopefully he's going to offer some value on the tote board. That's the number 1, English B. I know he ran very well last time out after being gelded and having that first start in quite a while. I'm curious to see what he'll do now because he's always been right there. And I'm wondering if these changes, the time off and the gelding, is going to help him move forward. So I do use English B on top. The number 3, Emmanuel, I mentioned, I think he's the horse to beat in here. Also have some interest in the number 7, Super Dormy, as well as the number 5, Good Governance, who I think ran pretty well once you watch the replay last time out in a Pegasus World Cup Turf Invitational. So that's my top 4 in here. Great betting race in the Canadian turf. Good luck this Saturday.